Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about Stylelines. In your textbook, we're dealing with chapter 6. The classic princess style line is what we'll be doing today. We'll be using our basic front bodice block with the single dart at the waist. And what we're basically creating is this kind of style line where it's a classic princess line which goes through the shoulder. We're going to talk about how we're going to create the style line through the shoulder, split the two pieces in half, making sure that we have enough ease around the bust area. So the first thing that we're going to do is you want to take your basic bodice block. We want to, of course, establish our grain line. Then we're going to trace off, once you've established your grain line, you want to trace off the entire block, shoulder, neckline, first dart leg, second dart leg, side seam, armhole notch, making sure you've marked your dart apex. Use your awl if you need to, or some other, your compass to punch that. Then what we want to do is on our sloper, mark where you want your new style line to go. So in this particular case, I'm using the mid-shoulder, which is the halfway point between the neck and the armhole, but it can be any place along the shoulder line. This is a design line detail. And what we're going to be doing, we're going to be extending our dart leg up through this style line. Now in this particular case, I'm drawing it straight. You can actually be at the same time using your curve tools to get a designed line. But for the first example, we're going to show what it looks like straight. So in this particular case, after you remove your block, you'll notice that the dart line and the style line from your mid-shoulder point will create kind of a angled or pointed pattern piece. That, if you were to keep that as it is, would not be a very pretty style line and would actually create problems in sewing. So the goal that you want to achieve is as smooth or straight a line as possible. So what we're going to do is, using your graph ruler, you're going to straighten the line. You're going to connect the first dart leg to the mid-shoulder point. Now, there are a few rules about maintaining stability when you're doing your pattern drafting that you must always remember. So you need to, from the bottom hem, mark up 3 inches from your first dart leg along the bottom, from the bottom hem. This is the point that you need to blend back into when you're creating a style line. Also, ease. In order to get the garment to fit properly around the body, we need to create enough space around the bust point so it doesn't get too tight. So from your true apex, we're going to use our graph ruler and mark 2 inches above on that style line and 2 inches below on each dart leg. So we need 2 inches of ease on both the above the bust point and below the bust point. So after I drafted my style line and created my 2 inches of ease, I'm going to trace these 2 pieces off using my point paper, and I will ultimately have 2 separate pieces. So this front panel, you can see here, if we were to separate out, now becomes this piece, front panel piece. This side panel, which will have this weird pointed triangular shape at the bust, would become this side, this piece. Now, a couple of things about smooth lines. We need to create ease over this panel piece here. We don't want a pointed piece because that'll create stress. So we're going to blend around the bust point to smooth that line. So these 2 inches become notches, control notches, where we control the ease, where the sewer is going to have to ease over that bust line. So we're going to keep that 2-inch mark that we had marked here as control notches. And we're going to use our Styleline tool, whether you use your French curve or your small clear curves. You're going to gently blend over the bust point, and you want to blend directly back into where those 2-inch notches are, all the way back into the original pattern piece. Here we've trued the line on our front panel so that we have a nice, from the 3 inches up from the hem, we have a nice straight line here all the way up to the mid-shoulder point. Now we need to go ahead and add seam allowance. This front panel piece, unless you're going to do a center front seam with the zipper, you will want to cut on the fold. So this frontal panel piece, you want to make sure you mark center front on the fold. You're always transferring your grain line. And remember to add your seam allowance. 1/4 inch at the neck, 1/2 inch at the shoulder, a 1/2 inch on your center seam between these two panels. We're going to do 1 inch at the hem so we can join to a skirt later. Same thing on this, 1/2 inch on the panel seam, 1/2 inch on the armhole, 1/2 inch on the side seam, 1 inch on the hem. Make sure that you do not leave the armhole notch on the pattern piece. You never want your sewer to cut into your actual body of your garment. You need to be able to transfer that notch to the armhole. And you want to also move the notches off of your pattern piece for your ease mark and move them into the seam allowance. Grain line. The grain line for the side panel, if you want there to be some good fit, is you're going to copy the grain line. The way that you're going to do this is literally with your graph ruler. You're basically transferring that grain line over to the side panel. And then that becomes the grain line on this panel. Another method is if you want them to be more fitted for the garment, say you have some stripes and you want them to miter, you will find a perpendicular line for which this grain line to intersect by taking the 2 hem points of your bottom hem on the panel piece and finding a perpendicular line to true. And then your grain line would be more angled. That's if you had maybe stripes and you want them to miter along this seam. Generally, if you want this if this pattern were a stripe, for example, and you wanted just to continue, you would transfer the grain line from the center front. If you want them to miter, then you're going to create a perpendicular line to this bottom hem, and then this becomes the new grain line for this side panel. When labeling, this piece becomes your side front panel, and you must cut 2. This is your front piece, and you're only going to need to cut 1 on the fold.